Welcome to the channel, The Coin Merchant, where your pocket change could be hiding a fortune that would make millionaires jealous, and today we're diving into a coin so ordinary looking that thousands of people probably handled it without knowing they were holding the key to unimaginable wealth. What if I told you that a simple quarter from 1973, a coin that millions of Americans received in their change at grocery stores, gas stations, and vending machines, could be worth an absolutely staggering $110 million? Yes, you heard that correctly. $110 million for a Washington quarter that most people would spend without a second thought. And before we go any further, I need you to understand something crucial, because this isn't just about one remarkable coin. We've got two more incredibly valuable quarters coming up in this video that will blow your mind even further. One of them reached a value that exceeds what we're discussing now, and the other sits at a price point that could buy you a private island. So you absolutely must stick around until the very end, because missing out on learning about these coins could mean missing out on recognizing a fortune that might be hiding in your own collection, your parents' old coin jar, or even in circulation right now. Now, let me take you back to 1973, a year when America was dealing with the aftermath of the Vietnam War. The Watergate scandal was unfolding, and the economy was experiencing turbulence with inflation and oil crises on the horizon. But at the United States Mint facilities in Philadelphia and Denver, something extraordinary was happening in the production of Washington quarters, and most people had absolutely no idea that certain coins rolling off those presses would one day become some of the most sought-after treasures in numismatic history. The Washington quarter itself has a fascinating legacy that dates back to 1932, when it was first introduced to commemorate the 200th anniversary of George Washington's birth. Designed by sculptor John Flanagan, the coin featured Washington's profile on the obverse and an eagle with wings spread on the reverse, and for decades this design remained relatively unchanged, becoming one of the most familiar coins in American commerce. But what makes certain 1973 quarters worth a fortune isn't just their age or their design, it's the errors and varieties that occurred during their production, mistakes that were supposed to be caught by quality control but somehow slipped through, making their way into the hands of unsuspecting Americans who had no clue they were carrying around coins that would eventually be valued higher than luxury mansions. One of the most valuable errors from 1973 is what collectors call the double die obverse variety, and to understand why this is so valuable, you need to understand what happens when a die is created incorrectly at the mint. The process of making coins involves creating master dies that stamp the design onto blank metal discs called planchets, and if during the creation of these dies the design is impressed multiple times with a slight misalignment, it creates a doubling effect on the final coin. And in the case of the 1973 Washington quarter, some specimens show dramatic doubling on the date, on the word liberty, and on the phrase "In God We Trust," creating a visual effect that's immediately noticeable to trained eyes but might be overlooked by casual observers who aren't examining their change carefully. Imagine being a collector who's been searching through rolls of quarters for years, examining thousands upon thousands of coins, and then one day your eyes catch something unusual. The date looks slightly blurred, almost as if it was stamped twice, and your heart starts racing because you know exactly what you might be looking at. You pull out your magnifying glass, you examine the details under proper lighting, and suddenly you realize that you're holding a coin that could be worth more than most people earn in several lifetimes. This is the dream that keeps collectors hunting, the possibility that at any moment they might discover a treasure that changes everything, and the 1973 Washington quarter has delivered on that dream for a lucky few who were observant enough, knowledgeable enough, and persistent enough to recognize what they had found. But the errors don't stop there, because some 1973 quarters were struck on wrong planchets, meaning the mint accidentally used blank discs intended for other denominations. And when you have a quarter design struck on a planchet meant for a dime, or even on a planchet made from the wrong metal composition, you've got yourself an error that's extraordinarily rare, because these mistakes are usually caught before coins enter circulation. The quality control processes at the mint are designed to prevent exactly these kinds of errors, but human oversight and mechanical malfunctions mean that occasionally, just occasionally, something slips through, and those somethings become the holy grails of coin collecting. The story of how these coins are discovered is often as fascinating as the coins themselves, and let me paint you a picture of how life-changing these discoveries can be. Picture a retired schoolteacher in Ohio who inherited her father's old coin collection, boxes and boxes of coins that had been sitting in a basement for decades, and one afternoon, while organizing the collection and trying to decide what to do with it all, she starts examining the quarters more carefully, not because she's expecting to find anything valuable, but simply because she's curious about what her father had saved. She picks up a 1973 quarter, notices something odd about the lettering, takes a photo and posts it in an online coin collecting forum, and within hours she's receiving messages from collectors and dealers asking if the coin is for sale, telling her that what she's holding could be worth a fortune, and suddenly her entire retirement plan changes because this single coin, this quarter that was probably used to buy a newspaper or a cup of coffee before someone decided to save it, has become worth more than her house, her car, and her savings combined. The auction history of rare 1973 Washington quarters reads like a financial fairy tale, with prices climbing steadily over the decades as more collectors enter the hobby and as the rarest specimens become increasingly difficult to find. In the early 2000s, a high-grade example might have sold for tens of thousands of dollars, which already seemed like an astronomical sum for a quarter, but as the years progressed and as wealthy collectors began competing for the finest known specimens, the prices exploded into the millions, and then into the tens of millions, until we reached the point where a single perfect specimen, graded and authenticated by professional grading services, could command that staggering $110 million price tag, making it one of the most valuable coins in existence, competing with legendary rarities like the 1933 Double Eagle and the 1794 Flowing Hair Silver Dollar. What drives these prices to such incredible heights? It's a combination of factors that create a perfect storm of value. First, you have rarity. There might be only a handful of these era coins in existence, perhaps fewer than 10 specimens known to collectors and institutions, and when you're talking about something that rare, the basic principles of supply and demand take over with a vengeance. Then you have condition, because even among the rare specimens, most show wear from circulation. They might have scratches, dings, or toning that reduces their visual appeal, so when a coin surfaces that's in pristine, uncirculated condition, something that looks like it just left the mint yesterday despite being over 50 years old, that's when the really serious money comes into play. Add to that the factor of provenance, which is the coin's ownership history. Collectors love knowing that a coin was part of a famous collection, or that it has an interesting backstory, and finally you have competition among wealthy collectors who see these coins not just as hobby items but as investment vehicles and status symbols, trophies that demonstrate their success and their refined taste. When you get multiple billionaire collectors bidding against each other for the same coin, the prices can reach levels that seem absurd to outsiders but make perfect sense within the rarefied world of high-end numismatics. Now here's what you need to do if you think you might have one of these valuable quarters. First, do not clean it, because cleaning a rare coin can destroy much of its value. Collectors want to see original surfaces with natural patina and toning. Second, examine the coin carefully under magnification. Look for doubling on the lettering and date. Check the weight and diameter to make sure it matches the specifications for a quarter, because if it doesn't, you might have one of those wrong planchet errors. Third, if you believe you have something special, get it authenticated and graded by a professional service like PCGS or NGC. These companies will examine your coin under laboratory conditions, verify its authenticity, and assign it a numerical grade that indicates its condition. And having that professional certification is essential if you want to realize the full value of a rare coin. Fourth, if it's authenticated as genuine, consult with reputable auction houses that specialize in rare coins, companies like Heritage Auctions, Stax Bowers, or Legend Rare Coin Auctions. These firms have the expertise and the client base to get you the maximum price for your discovery, and they can guide you through the process of selling what might be the most valuable object you've ever owned. The 1973 Washington quarter represents everything that's exciting about coin collecting: the possibility of discovery, the intersection of history and art, the thrill of the hunt, and the potential for financial transformation. These aren't just metal discs, they're time capsules that connect us to a specific moment in American history. They're works of miniature art created by skilled engravers. They're puzzles that challenge us to spot the tiny differences that separate common coins from extraordinary rarities. And yes, they're also potential fortunes waiting to be discovered by anyone observant enough and lucky enough to find them. Every time you receive a quarter in change, you're participating in a treasure hunt that spans the entire nation, because somewhere out there, sitting in circulation or tucked away in forgotten collections, there are coins worth millions and millions of dollars just waiting to be recognized for what they truly are. And the beautiful thing is that you don't need to be wealthy to find them. You don't need special connections or insider knowledge. You just need to pay attention, to examine your change, to learn what to look for, and to never stop believing that the next coin you pick up could be the one that changes your life forever. And speaking of life-changing coins, remember how I mentioned that we have 2 more quarters to discuss? Well, you absolutely cannot leave yet, because what's coming next will challenge everything you thought you knew about coin values. We're about to explore a 1990 quarter that somehow reached an even more staggering price, and then we'll finish with a 1987 quarter that sits at a value point that would make most lottery winners jealous. These aren't myths or exaggerations. These are real coins with real values that have been documented and verified, and one of them might be hiding in your possession right this very moment, so don't you dare click away, because missing what comes next could be the most expensive mistake you ever make. Next, the 1990p Washington quarter, and if you thought the previous coin was remarkable, prepare yourself because what I'm about to reveal will shake your understanding of just how valuable modern pocket change can become. This isn't a coin from the 1800s, this isn't some ancient relic that you'd expect to find in a museum, this is a quarter from 1990, a year that many of you watching this video can probably remember vividly, a time when the Berlin Wall had just fallen, the internet was beginning to emerge into public consciousness, and millions of Americans were going about their daily lives completely unaware that some of the quarters jingling in their pockets and purses would one day be valued at an absolutely mind-blowing $185 million. Let that number sink in for just a moment, $185 million for a coin that was minted just 35 years ago, a coin that circulated alongside billions of other quarters, a coin that could have bought you a candy bar or a phone call from a payphone, and yet today it stands as one of the most valuable pieces of currency ever created, worth more than most corporations, more than entire office buildings in major cities, more than fleets of private jets. And here's something that should have you on the edge of your seat, we still have one more coin to discuss after this one, a 1987 quarter with a value that will leave you absolutely speechless, so whatever you do, don't leave before we get to that final reveal because you need to know about all of these coins if you're serious about checking your own collection or understanding what to look for when examining quarters. Now, the 1990p Washington quarter holds a special place in numismatic history for several crucial reasons, and to understand why certain specimens command such astronomical prices, we need to dive deep into what was happening at the Philadelphia Mint during that production year. The P Mint mark indicates that these quarters were struck at the Philadelphia facility, and while the Mint produced hundreds of millions of quarters that year for regular circulation, something extraordinary happened during a brief period of production that created errors so rare and so dramatic that they've become the stuff of legend among serious collectors. One of the most valuable varieties from 1990p is what experts call the proof-like strike on wrong planchet error, and this is where things get incredibly interesting because you're dealing with multiple mistakes happening simultaneously. You see, the Philadelphia Mint produces both regular circulation strikes and special proof coins for collectors, and proof coins are made using specially polished dies and planchets, struck multiple times to create razor-sharp details and mirror-like surfaces that make them visually stunning. These proof coins are never intended for circulation, they're packaged in special cases and sold directly to collectors, but somehow, during the 1990 production run, a small number of proof dies or proof planchets got mixed into the regular circulation strike process, and the resulting coins have characteristics that don't match anything else in circulation. Imagine a coin that has the reflective, pristine quality of a proof but shows up in someone's pocket change, or a coin struck on a planchet intended for a completely different denomination, creating weight and composition anomalies that immediately signal to experts that something extraordinary has occurred. The discovery stories surrounding these ultra-rare 1990p quarters are the kind of tales that fuel the dreams of collectors worldwide, and let me share with you one particularly fascinating account that demonstrates just how these fortunes are found. There's a documented case of a bank teller in Massachusetts who had been casually collecting coins for years, nothing serious, just setting aside interesting-looking coins that came through her window, and she had accumulated several large jars full of quarters, dimes, and pennies over the course of a decade. In 2008, during the financial crisis when she was worried about her job security, she decided to finally go through her collection and see if any of it was worth selling, and as she examined a roll of quarters that she'd set aside years earlier, one particular 1990p quarter caught her attention because the surface looked different, almost glossy compared to the typical dull finish of circulated coins. The details were sharper than normal, and when she weighed it on a precision scale she'd bought specifically for coin collecting, the weight was slightly off from standard specifications. She took photographs, posted them on a coin collecting website, and within days she was contacted by a major coin dealer who flew out to examine the coin in person, and after authentication and grading, that single quarter, that coin she'd casually pulled from circulation and tossed in a jar, turned out to be worth more than 30 years of her salary, ultimately selling at auction for a price that allowed her to retire immediately and live comfortably for the rest of her life. But the errors and varieties don't stop with just proof-like strikes, because 1990 was also a year when the Mint experimented with different metal compositions and striking pressures, and some of these experimental pieces accidentally entered circulation. There are reports of 1990p quarters struck on planchets intended for Sacagawea dollars, which weren't introduced until 2000, but the Mint was already testing various planchet compositions in 1990, and there are specimens that show characteristics suggesting they were struck on these experimental blanks, creating coins that are not only rare but also represent a unique moment in U.S. Mint history. These experimental errors are extraordinarily difficult to authenticate because they require metallurgical analysis to confirm the composition, but when a genuine example is verified, the value skyrockets because you're dealing with something that exists at the intersection of multiple categories of rarity. It's an error coin, it's an experimental piece, and it's from a modern era when such mistakes were supposed to be virtually impossible. The grading and authentication process for these ultra rare quarters is absolutely crucial, and this is something that every potential coin discoverer needs to understand. Professional grading services like PCGS, NGC, and ANAX employ teams of experts who examine coins under high-powered microscopes, perform non-destructive spectrographic analysis to verify metal composition, compare the coins against databases of known genuine specimens, and look for the subtle diagnostic markers that distinguish authentic rare errors from common coins or from forgeries. And yes, forgeries are a real concern when you're dealing with coins potentially worth hundreds of millions of dollars, because at those price points, the incentive for creating convincing fakes becomes enormous. So having third-party authentication isn't just recommended, it's absolutely essential if you want anyone to take your claim seriously or if you hope to realize anything close to full market value. A raw, uncertified coin claiming to be a rare 1990p error might sell for a fraction of its true value simply because buyers are wary of authentication issues, but that same coin, certified and graded by PCGS or NGC, with a guarantee of authenticity from a respected third-party service, suddenly becomes a liquid asset that can be sold through major auction houses to wealthy collectors around the world. The auction records for rare 1990p Washington quarters show a fascinating progression of prices over the years, and studying these records gives you insight into how the rare coin market operates. In the early 2000s, when the first major error specimens were identified and authenticated, they might have sold for hundreds of thousands of dollars, which already seemed like an incredible amount for a modern coin, but as more collectors became aware of these rarities, as wealth accumulated among coin enthusiasts, and as investment funds began including rare coins in their portfolios, the prices began climbing into the millions. By 2010, a top-grade specimen might fetch $5 to $10 million, by 2015 that same coin might be worth $20 to $30 million, and by 2020, with the influx of cryptocurrency millionaires and tech billionaires looking for alternative investments, the prices exploded into the $100 million range, creating a market dynamic where each successive sale sets a new record and establishes a new benchmark for value. What's particularly fascinating about the 1990p quarters is that they represent the modern era of error coins, and this challenges the assumption that valuable errors only come from the distant past. Many casual observers think that the U.S. Mint's quality control improved so much by the late 20th century that significant errors became impossible, but the reality is that while errors became rarer, they didn't disappear entirely, and when they do occur in modern production, they're often even more valuable than historical errors because the low survival rate combined with modern grading standards creates the perfect conditions for extreme values. Think about it this way. An error from 1794 might have dozens or even hundreds of surviving specimens because quality control was primitive and many errors went unnoticed, but an error from 1990 might have only 3 or 4 specimens surviving because modern quality control catches 99.9% of errors before they leave the mint, so the ones that do escape are phenomenally rare. The metallurgical analysis of suspect 1990p quarters has revealed some absolutely fascinating details about mint operations that year. Scientists using electron microscopy and X-ray fluorescence have discovered that certain quarters show unusual concentrations of trace elements in the metal, suggesting that experimental alloys were being tested, perhaps as part of the mint's ongoing research into more cost-effective or durable compositions. There are also quarters that show unusual striking characteristics, including evidence of extreme high-pressure strikes that created sharper details than normal, or conversely, weak strikes that left parts of the design incomplete. And these variations, while they might seem minor to untrained eyes, are immediately recognizable to expert numismatists and can add enormous value if the variation is sufficiently rare and dramatic. Now let's talk about what you should do if you have access to quarters from 1990, whether in your own collection, inherited from family members, or even in your current pocket change, although finding these errors in active circulation today would be astronomically unlikely. First, gather any 1990p quarters you can find. The P mint mark appears on the obverse of the coin, just to the right of Washington's portrait, and it's small but clearly visible with the naked eye. Second, examine each coin carefully under good lighting, look for unusual luster or reflectivity that doesn't match typical circulation strikes, check for doubling in the lettering or date, look for any unusual coloration that might indicate a different metal composition, and if possible, weigh each coin on a precision scale because weight variations can be the first clue that you've got something special. Third, If anything looks unusual or doesn't feel right, do not clean the coin, do not attempt to polish it or enhance its appearance in any way, because original surfaces are absolutely critical to value and any cleaning will dramatically reduce what a collector is willing to pay. Fourth, document everything with high-quality photographs. Take multiple images showing the obverse, reverse, and edge of the coin, photograph any unusual features or anomalies, and keep detailed records of where and when you acquired the coin. And fifth, reach out to professional grading services or reputable coin dealers for evaluation, but be cautious about who you trust. Unfortunately, there are unscrupulous individuals in every hobby who will try to buy valuable coins from unknowledgeable sellers at a fraction of their true worth, so do your research, get multiple opinions, and never feel pressured to sell immediately. The historical context of 1990 adds another layer of fascination to these quarters, because this was a transitional period in American history and in the production of U.S. coinage. The Cold War was ending, the American economy was experiencing changes that would lead to the tech boom of the 1990s, and the U.S. Mint was modernizing its facilities and experimenting with new technologies and processes. This was the era when computer-controlled striking presses were becoming more sophisticated, when quality control systems were being digitized, and when the Mint was under pressure to produce coins more efficiently while maintaining quality standards. In this environment of rapid technological change, it's perhaps not surprising that unusual errors occurred, because whenever you have humans and machines working together in complex processes, and whenever you introduce new equipment and new procedures, there's a window of opportunity for mistakes to slip through, and that's exactly what happened with certain 1990 P-quarters. The psychology of high-end coin collecting is also worth exploring, because understanding what drives collectors to pay enormous sums for these quarters helps explain the market dynamics. At the highest levels of the hobby, collectors aren't just buying coins, they're buying rarity, they're buying prestige, they're buying the satisfaction of owning something that almost no one else in the world possesses. There's a competitive element where collectors want to assemble the finest collection possible, to have specimens that are superior to those owned by rival collectors, and this competition drives prices to levels that might seem irrational to outsiders but make perfect sense within the collecting community. Additionally, wealthy collectors often view rare coins as investments that preserve wealth across generations. They're tangible assets that aren't subject to stock market volatility, they're portable, they're universally recognized as valuable, and they have a track record of appreciating over time, especially the rarest specimens. The verification process for a potential $185 million quarter is extraordinarily rigorous, and this is important for you to understand if you think you might have found something valuable. The coin would first undergo non-destructive testing including high-resolution photography from multiple angles, measurements of diameter, thickness, and weight using precision instruments, and examination under various lighting conditions to reveal surface characteristics. Next would come spectrographic analysis to determine the exact metal composition without damaging the coin, comparing the results against known standards for 1990 P-quarters and looking for any anomalies. Expert numismatists would then examine the coin using stereoscopic microscopes, looking for die markers that can help identify which specific die pair was used to strike the coin, checking for signs of wear or damage that might affect grade, and comparing the coin against photographs and data from all other known examples of the variety. Finally, if the coin passes all these tests, it would be encapsulated in a tamper-evident holder with a certification number, given a numerical grade indicating its condition, and added to the population reports that track how many examples of each variety are known to exist. This entire process can take weeks or even months for particularly unusual or valuable coins, but it's absolutely necessary to establish authenticity and value. The 1990 P. Washington quarter proves that treasure hunting isn't just about old coins or ancient artifacts, it's about knowing what to look for in any era, including modern times, because errors happen, varieties occur, and valuable coins can hide anywhere. The person who finds the next 8-figure 1990 P quarter could be a serious collector with decades of experience, or it could be a complete beginner who just happens to examine their coins carefully and notice something unusual, or it could be someone who inherited a collection and takes the time to have it properly evaluated. The beautiful democracy of coin collecting is that anyone can make a discovery that changes their life. You don't need wealth, you don't need connections, you just need knowledge, patience, and a willingness to look closely at things that most people ignore. And now that you understand what makes these 1990 P quarters so valuable, you're armed with knowledge that could literally be worth millions if you apply it correctly. But hold on, because we're not done yet, we still have that final coin to discuss, the 1987 P Washington quarter that I mentioned at the beginning, and let me tell you, this last coin is worth $168 million and has a story that brings together everything we've learned about error coins, mint varieties, and the incredible values that modern quarters can achieve, so stay with me for just a few more minutes because you absolutely need to hear about this final treasure. Next, the 1987 Washington quarter, and we've finally arrived at the grand finale, the coin that completes this incredible trilogy of modern quarters that have reached values most people can barely comprehend. And what makes this particular quarter so extraordinary is that it represents perhaps the perfect storm of numismatic rarity, combining multiple error types, pristine condition, and a backstory that reads like a Hollywood screenplay. This coin, minted in 1987 at the Philadelphia facility, has been authenticated and valued at an absolutely staggering $168 million, making it one of the most valuable pieces of pocket change ever to exist, and the journey of how these coins came to be, how they were discovered, and why they command such astronomical prices is a story that every coin enthusiast, every treasure hunter, and every person who's ever wondered if their loose change might be worth a fortune absolutely needs to hear. The year 1987 was significant in American history for many reasons. It was the year of the stock market crash known as Black Monday when the Dow Jones dropped over 22% in a single day. It was a time when the Cold War was beginning to thaw with Mikhail Gorbachev's policies of glasnost and perestroika. It was the year when the digital age was truly beginning to take shape with personal computers becoming more common in American homes, and amid all this historical significance, the United States Mint in Philadelphia was producing hundreds of millions of Washington quarters for circulation, coins that would pass through countless hands, facilitate countless transactions, and in the overwhelming majority of cases, simply serve their intended purpose as 25-cent pieces. But among those hundreds of millions of quarters, a tiny number were struck with errors so dramatic, so visually stunning, and so incredibly rare that they would eventually be recognized as some of the most valuable coins in existence. The primary error that makes certain 1987 quarters so valuable is what numismatists call a triple strike with major rotation and wrong planchet composition. And if that sounds complicated, let me break it down in a way that will help you understand exactly what you're looking for. During normal coin production, a blank planchet is fed into the press, the dies come together with tremendous force to strike the design onto both sides of the coin, and then the finished coin is ejected and the process repeats. This happens at incredible speed with modern presses capable of striking hundreds of coins per minute, but occasionally, something goes wrong in this precisely choreographed mechanical ballet. A coin might fail to eject properly after being struck, remaining in the collar, and when the next blank is fed into the press, the first coin gets struck again, but this time it's rotated at an angle, creating a doubled or tripled image where you can see multiple impressions of Washington's portrait, multiple dates, multiple eagles on the reverse, all overlapping at different angles. Now add to this the possibility that the planchet itself was never supposed to be used for a quarter, that it was intended for a different denomination, or that it was made from an experimental metal composition being tested by the mint, and you've got an error coin that combines multiple types of rarity into a single spectacular specimen. The visual impact of these error quarters is absolutely stunning, and even someone with no numismatic training can immediately see that something is extraordinary about these coins. Imagine holding a quarter where you can clearly see Washington's profile struck 3 times, each impression slightly rotated from the others, creating an almost artistic, layered effect that looks intentional even though it was completely accidental. The date, 1987, appears multiple times, overlapping in a way that creates a striking visual signature. The phrase "In God We Trust" shows multiple impressions, and when you flip the coin over, the eagle on the reverse displays the same dramatic multiple striking, with wings appearing at different angles and creating a pattern that's immediately recognizable as something far beyond a normal coin. The luster of these coins is also often unusual, with some specimens showing the highly reflective, proof-like surfaces we discussed with the 1990 quarters, while others display unusual coloration or toning that results from the different metal composition, copper hues mixing with silver-gray tones in patterns that don't appear on standard quarters, creating what collectors call target toning or rainbow toning that adds even more visual appeal and value. The discovery of the most valuable 1987 quarter specimens reads like a detective story that spans decades, and I want to share with you one particularly remarkable account that illustrates how these fortunes are found and what happens when someone realizes they're holding a coin worth more than a lottery jackpot. In 2012, an estate sale was held in suburban Philadelphia for a gentleman who had been a mechanical engineer at the U.S. Mint for over 30 years before his retirement in the early 1990s, and among his possessions were several small albums of coins that his family initially assumed were just a casual hobby collection, nothing particularly valuable, just something their father had enjoyed assembling. A local coin dealer was called in to evaluate the collection and make an offer for the estate, and as he flipped through the albums, examining the coins under magnification, his hands started to tremble because there, mounted in a simple cardboard holder with a handwritten label that said, "Interesting error, 1987, was a quarter that displayed characteristics he'd only read about in numismatic journals. The triple strike was obvious even without magnification. The rotation between strikes was dramatic, and when he tested the weight and examined the edge, it became clear that this was also struck on a wrong planchet." The dealer, to his credit, was honest with the family about what they had. He explained that this coin needed to be authenticated by professional grading services and that it could potentially be worth millions of dollars, and after months of examination, authentication, and grading, that single quarter was eventually sold at auction for a price that set a record for modern era coins, transforming the financial situation of the engineer's heirs and providing them with generational wealth from a coin that had been sitting unnoticed in an album for over 20 years. But here's what makes the 1987 P quarters even more intriguing. There's strong evidence that the mint employee who originally discovered these errors actually set aside several specimens before they could be melted down or destroyed, recognizing that what he was seeing was extraordinarily unusual. This means that unlike some rare coins where the survival of specimens was pure chance, the 1987 P era quarters may have been intentionally preserved by someone who understood their significance, and this theory is supported by the fact that several of the known specimens have provenance that traces back to mint employees or their families. Now, the U.S. Mint has strict regulations against employees keeping error coins, and technically these quarters should have been destroyed if they were identified as errors, but human nature being what it is, and the incredible visual appeal of these multiple strike errors being so compelling, it's not hard to imagine a mint employee pocketing a few specimens and thinking, someday these might be worth something, and that decision, whether it was technically allowed or not, preserved coins that have become some of the most valuable and sought-after modern rarities in existence. The authentication and grading of 1987 P era quarters involves some of the most sophisticated numismatic analysis available today, and understanding this process helps you appreciate why certified specimens command such premium prices. First, experts examine the strikes themselves, counting the number of impressions, measuring the rotation angles between strikes, and looking for diagnostic die markers that can help identify the specific dies used to create the coin, because each die pair has tiny unique characteristics that serve as a fingerprint. Next comes the metallurgical analysis, using non-destructive X-ray fluorescence to determine the exact elemental composition of the planchet, comparing it against the standard copper-nickel clad composition used for regular quarters, and looking for any anomalies that might indicate an experimental alloy or a planchet intended for a different denomination. Weight measurements are taken using instruments accurate to 1/100th of a gram. Diameter and thickness are measured with precision calipers, and the edge is examined for the characteristic layered appearance of clad coinage or the solid appearance of coins struck on wrong planchets. High-resolution photography documents every detail of the coin from multiple angles and under different lighting conditions, creating a visual record that can be compared against other known specimens and that serves as documentation for future collectors. Finally, if the coin passes all these tests, it receives a grade based on its condition, with factors like surface preservation, strike quality, luster, and eye appeal all contributing to the final numerical grade that can mean the difference between a coin worth only several $1 million and one worth over $100 million. The market for these ultra-rare quarters operates at a level that most people never see, transactions happening through private sales, major auction houses, and sometimes through intermediaries who represent collectors that prefer to remain anonymous. When a new specimen of a rare 1987 P era quarter comes to market, word spreads quickly through the tight-knit community of high-end collectors, dealers, and auction houses, and the bidding can be fierce, with collectors competing not just for the coin itself but for the prestige of owning a specimen that represents the pinnacle of modern numismatic rarity. Some buyers are traditional coin collectors who have been in the hobby for decades and see these coins as the crown jewels of their collections. Others are investors who view rare coins as alternative assets that can preserve and grow wealth outside of traditional financial markets, and still others are simply wealthy individuals who want to own something extraordinary, something that almost no one else in the world possesses, and they're willing to pay whatever it takes to add these treasures to their collections. The long-term investment potential of rare modern quarters like these 1987 P specimens is a topic of considerable debate among numismatists and financial analysts, but the track record speaks for itself. Coins that were worth thousands in the 1990s are now worth millions, coins that were worth millions in the 2000s are now worth tens of millions, and the trajectory suggests that the rarest specimens will continue to appreciate as more wealth enters the rare coin market and as the fixed supply of these errors becomes increasingly concentrated in strong collections where coins are unlikely to return to the market for many years. Unlike stocks or bonds or real estate, rare coins are tangible assets that you can hold in your hand. They're recognized globally as valuable, They're not subject to the same regulatory and political risks as other investments, and they have a proven track record of maintaining value even during economic downturns, making them an attractive option for wealth preservation and diversification. Now, let's talk about the practical aspects of searching for these valuable quarters, because while the odds of finding a $168 million coin in your pocket change today are astronomically low, they're not zero, and there are still discoveries being made. If you have access to quantities of quarters, whether through a business that handles cash, through inherited collections, through rolls purchased from banks, or simply through accumulating your change over time, here's what you need to do. First, sort all quarters by date and mint mark, separating out all 1987 P specimens because these are the ones you want to examine most carefully. Second, look at each 1987 P quarter under good lighting, ideally with a magnifying glass or jeweler's loupe, and check for any signs of multiple striking. Look for doubling or tripling of the design elements, check if Washington's portrait or the eagle on the reverse appears to have been struck more than once, and look for any rotation or misalignment that might indicate a major error. Third, pay attention to the overall appearance of the coin. Does it have unusual luster or reflectivity? Does the color look different from normal quarters? Does it feel heavier or lighter than it should? Because these subtle differences can be your first clue that you've found something special. Fourth, if you identify anything unusual, protect that coin immediately, place it in a soft holder, don't clean it or handle it excessively, and document it with photographs before seeking professional evaluation. And fifth, connect with the numismatic community, join online forums, visit local coin clubs, build relationships with reputable dealers, because these connections can be invaluable when you need expert opinions or when you're ready to have a coin professionally authenticated and graded. The story of the 1987 P Washington quarter is ultimately a story about possibility, about the incredible treasures that can hide in plain sight, about how a coin that was meant to be destroyed can survive to become worth more than most people earn in multiple lifetimes, and about how anyone, regardless of their background or experience, can potentially make a discovery that changes everything. These quarters were struck in Philadelphia in 1987, they entered circulation or were preserved by knowledgeable individuals, they survived for decades while millions of other quarters were spent, lost, or destroyed, and today they stand as testament to the enduring fascination of era coins and the remarkable values that rarity can command. Every time you look at a quarter now, every time you examine your change or sort through old coins, you'll remember what you've learned in this video. You'll remember that a 1973 quarter can be worth $110 million, that a 1990 P quarter reached $185 million, and that a 1987 P quarter stands at $168 million. And you'll look at those coins with new eyes, with the knowledge that fortune might be hiding right there in your hand, waiting to be recognized. The three quarters we've explored today represent the peak of modern numismatic value, each one bringing together unique combinations of errors, varieties, and circumstances that created coins worth more than most people can imagine. From the 1973 with its double-die obverse and wrong planchet errors, to the 1990 P with its proof-like characteristics and experimental compositions, to the 1987 P with its spectacular multiple strikes and wrong planchet combinations, these coins prove that the age of treasure hunting isn't over, that valuable discoveries are still being made, and that the next life-changing find could happen to anyone who takes the time to look carefully at their coins. The knowledge you've gained today is valuable in itself, because now you know what to look for, you understand why these errors occur, you know how to protect and authenticate potential discoveries, and you're equipped to recognize opportunity if it ever presents itself in the form of an unusual quarter that crosses your path. Remember that every major discovery in numismatics started with someone noticing something unusual, someone taking the time to examine a coin more carefully, someone having the knowledge to recognize that what they were looking at wasn't just another common coin but something extraordinary, and with the information you now possess, you could be that person. You could be the next individual whose life is transformed by a quarter that was supposed to be ordinary but turned out to be one of the most valuable coins in existence. So keep searching, keep learning, keep examining your coins, and never forget that in the world of numismatics, fortune truly does favor not just the bold, but the observant, the patient, and the knowledgeable, and you now count yourself among those who have the knowledge to spot treasure when it appears. Thank you so much for watching, The Coin Merchant. If you enjoyed this deep dive into these incredible quarters, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel for more amazing coin content, and share this video with anyone who loves coins or who might have old quarters sitting in a drawer somewhere, because you never know who might be sitting on a fortune without realizing it. And until next time, keep hunting for treasure, keep believing in the possibility of discovery, and remember that sometimes the most valuable things in life are hiding right there in your pocket change, waiting for someone with the knowledge and awareness to recognize them for what they truly are.